There's quite a bit of talk in the environmental movement about a life cycle assessment and looking at the holistic picture, understanding that every phase of a product's development has environmental impacts. But it really is still very, very young in its evaluation. And I think, as in the same way that I really didn't need proof to know that taking care of an old building was a smart thing to do, I don't think I at least really need to wait for the scientific data or the exact analysis of what each evaluation is. We do know that with every product that we buy, there are tremendous hidden costs, tremendous upstream flows and downstream flows. So I talked about some of the downstream just from the waste. We know, and I'm sorry, this was a little loaded, putting a window out on the sidewalk, but we know that for every ton, for every trash can of waste that you put out on your sidewalk, there's at least 50 to 100 trash cans behind it that have already been part of the waste stream, that are part of the removal of the extraction, part of the production, part of the transportation of that product. So when people walk into a Walmart, wherever it might be, and pick up an object, there is at least a 50 to 1 basis already of waste behind them before they throw that into the waste bin when they get home. Different things have a different waste factor. My wedding ring, my simple little wedding ring, because metal is becoming one of the precious things that's harder and harder to find. My wedding ring leaves behind 3 tons of waste. Metals are one of our most wasteful resources as we try to extract them from the earth. In fact, we use in our country, in energy production, 30% of all our energy that we use for manufacturing goes for several small things. It goes for paper, for metal, for plastics, and for glass. And that's where most of our manufacturing energy goes, not to mention all of the stuff that happened before it even got to this country as we extracted it. So we have talked a lot when we learn about products and buildings. We talk about embodied energy. We talk about the energy it took to make something. And we talk about coal being bad and how most of the carbon and electricity in this country comes from coal. And we talk more frequently now than we used to about the importance of the embodied water that's inside a product and the importance of water. Many people think that water, because it is not replaceable, because it has no alternative, because you can't change from wood to coal to oil to gas. With water, there's only water. That water will be more precious than oil and will be a higher impact in how we use it and what it makes. We know, and I had Donella Meadows, who was the co-author of The Limits of Growth in 1970, 1976 was one of my heroes, so I had to quote this about water, because I think that we seriously downgrade the importance of it. And in Virginia, I'm counting on you with your wonderful environmental movement and your awareness of what happens to the Chesapeake to pay attention to what it means to use water in products. Just to give you an example, actually, about water. We know that when you make a car that wasn't perhaps made here, and you ship it across the world, you're actually shipping about a year's use of water from a domestic house. You're moving that water around the globe in the form of a new vehicle. When you make a house, and I'll show this later just with energy, when you make a house in Australia, where they've done most of the work on embodied energy and embodied water, you're using about 15 years of family's water to make that house. So it'll be 15 years before just water being used by the house is what the impact on the environment is. So as we progress from understanding that stuff is also about buildings, we have to look at how our choices about stuff are affecting our choices about buildings and our decisions about buildings. We cover up 1 million acres of farmland in this country every year. We think that when we do that, the estimates are that it's about 3 times the resources because of the additional infrastructure and also because of the size of the homes. There's new estimates being done that we have to, it's not enough to look at a building, any building, and say that this is a green building. If you haven't done the calculations on what the energy to move back and forth from that building is. And it's often 2 to 3 times the actual end-use energy of a building. So I'm a little intolerant of anybody talking to me about a green building or a green house that still requires you to drive to it, because that's very much part of the environmental footprint. And clearly, the way we use the space around these houses is part of the environmental footprint. This might be called a green subdivision. It might be all zero-energy houses, but they're oversized and they're overspaced, and they've got too much infrastructure, and they're on precious land, and we can't do this. Now, we know that when we do things like that, we become very car dependent. We know that being car dependent actually has multiple facets. It actually is part of the health issue because we gain weight when we use cars. We don't walk as much, our health goes down. And I just, Lance Posey had written this in Architect Magazine because there was a proposal to expand one of the highways, actually, I believe in Virginia, so that you could slug into Washington more easily. And his comment was that that was the equivalent of force-feeding hamburgers to someone who was already overweight. So, what are our choices that we're making about buildings? The same that we're making about stuff. We're making bigger and bigger buildings to do the same thing. We are using more resources, even though they might be called green, even though they might be, environmentally friendly. They are still using more resources to get where they are, and we're still putting fewer people into these buildings. And actually, even though that living by yourself might lower your carbon footprint, this is not true. If you live by yourself, you actually use 18% more energy than if you live with someone else. And you also have your very own couch or two, and your very own computer or two, and your very own TV or two. And so you are using more resources, not just more energy. So your carbon footprint in this country is consistently going up because our households are downsizing and our space is increasing. So we know that when we're doing that, we've all gotten this, that taking down a building is a bad thing to do. Taking down a building is a terrible waste of resources, resources that may have come out of the ground 100 years ago. But it isn't so much about the wasted resources. That's really sort of the wrong analogy. It isn't about the embodied energy or the embodied water. It's about the avoided impact of building new.